Hello and welcome to this special presentation, a debate over whether New Yorkers should vote to hold a constitutional convention. I'm Andrew Whitman. Every 20 years, the New York State Constitution requires that voters make a decision over whether to hold a convention to amend the state constitution. And 2017 is one of those years. If voters say yes, the state would convene its fifth such voter-driven convention since 1886. Here's what you'll see on the ballot when you go to vote this November. Quote, shall there be a convention to revise the Constitution and amend the same? And based on the most recent polling, New Yorkers aren't sure how to answer that question. A July 18th poll from Siena shows more voters supporting a convention than opposing one, though 2/3 of all voters say they've heard nothing about a convention at this point, which means these numbers are anything but firm. To help you learn more and figure out how you'll vote on this question come November, we turn to these gentlemen. Richard Brodsky, former Westchester Democratic Assemblyman, now a contributor to RNN and FiOS 1 News and a columnist for the Albany Times-Union and the Huffington Post. Richard favors a constitutional convention. On the other side of the table is Arthur Jerry Kremer. Jerry is a former Democratic Assemblyman who represented Nassau County and is now the chairman of Empire Government Strategies, a government relations and lobbying group. Jerry opposes a constitutional convention. Gentlemen, welcome. And we're going to begin with opening statements so both Richard and Jerry can make their cases directly to you at home. Let's begin with the arguments for a constitutional convention. Richard, the floor is yours.
Thanks. America is a beacon of liberty and economic prosperity across the world. It has been and remains so. The reason, in the end, is that the sovereign people make decisions about the issues that matter in their lives. You, voters, you, citizens, have the ultimate say about what kind of nation we are. The vote in November on a constitutional convention is your opportunity to do the same thing for the state of New York. It is your opportunity to seize control of issues, of practices, policies, and politics that govern the state and the way you live. It is extraordinarily important that that opportunity be taken. You will hear counsels of cynicism and despair. You will hear concerns about risks. Some of those arguments are well-founded, some are not. But in the end, the ability of the people of the state to govern themselves, where the final product only becomes law if it is approved by you in a referendum, is the triumph of participatory democracy, and it's an opportunity which I urge you to seize. Vote yes on the proposition to call a constitutional convention, in November.
Richard, thank you very much. Jerry Kremer, your opening statement.
Thank you. I guess I've been there, done that, spending 23 years in the state legislature. And during that time, I had an opportunity to observe firsthand what a constitutional convention looks like. And much to my surprise and to my chagrin, that constitutional convention was very much, in 1967, a carbon copy of a legislative session. Same lobbyists who now were getting their double dip, many legislators who were getting their pensions padded, if you will, by virtue of their appearance. And the more I sat in at various meetings of the committees, the more I was convinced that a constitutional convention is so politically driven, is so free of this idea of, we're going to have Mr. Smith goes to Washington. Constitutional conventions just in New York are just not that. They tend to be nothing more than a repeat of the political model that we see all the time. I don't like it. I think the public should vote no, and there'll be more discussion as to why we think they should not vote for it.
Gentlemen, thank you both very much. Let's focus more now on what a constitutional convention could do, the issues it could take up, and how those issues might impact New Yorkers. Richard, we'll start with you. What are those issues, and why is a constitutional convention the right venue for dealing with those issues, as opposed to the regular process of business in Albany?
The Constitutional Convention can address the things that matter in the lives of New Yorkers. The way our schools are run, the need for a better college system, health care, taxation, and the way in which the government operates. Those issues are ripe for the control and participation of people, and a referendum making the kinds of changes that would improve the lives of New Yorkers. The range of issues is as broad as the range of concerns people have. The Adirondacks, clean air, the way in which schools are operated. If you care about those things, if you think we could make improvements in those things, vote yes for a convention.
My view of the Constitutional Convention is that, first of all, interesting statistics for the viewers. In the last 100 years, over 200 amendments have been approved by the state legislature changing our Constitution. This year in November on the ballot, there will be a vote on whether public officials should be denied their pensions when they're convicted of an act while they're in public office. The current process works. We'd like to see more that's done by the legislature, but I blame that more on advocates for change who somehow think that this Constitutional Convention vote is their only chance when they have 365 days a year to advocate for change.
Let's examine the question that Andrew asked. What should, if it was called, what should a Constitutional Convention address? What are the issues that matter to people?
Well, the fact of the matter is, you mentioned the Adirondacks and environmental groups. A lot of them are against having a convention that deals with the Adirondacks for their fear that the Adirondacks will be opened up to the timber interests. I mean, there's an example. I've looked at the Constitution. Yes, it's long and yes, it's wordy. But my feeling is there are so many potential groups outside who want to make changes in that Constitution that it's not going to be a controlled event.
It shouldn't be a controlled event. With all due respect to an old colleague and a friend, those are the counsels of despair. Should our school systems be improved? Should we have a constitutional right to a higher education? Should the ethics laws that we can't get through the legislature be put into the Constitution? Those issues are so much more important than the cynical notion that lobbyists will control this as well. And by the way, there were only 13 delegates out of 220 at the last convention in '67 who were legislators. The notion that the legislators are going to dominate this is just not true.
But why a constitutional convention? If, as Jerry mentioned, the Constitution's been amended 200 times through regular order, why call a constitutional convention? Can't those issues that you mentioned be dealt with through a regular session in Albany?
They haven't been. And the people's sovereignty, the ability for the people in the end to control this by a referendum, will push the delegates to provide the people with choices about these real things. We are in trouble to some extent in New York. Those troubles are partially political, but partially the way our institutions work. And if we can't address them and haven't addressed them in 50 years, a constitutional convention is the best opportunity to do so now.
Jerry, if those points haven't been brought up in the regular process, why not have a convention to deal with them?
Well, the fact of the matter is that at the last convention in '67, there were 49 people who were elected officials serving in one capacity or another. Supreme Court judges, town supervisors, county executives. So that's a pretty big number of delegates with a very strong political agenda. My concern about a constitutional convention really is they're not going to be, in this environment that we live in, able to tackle those types of issues. There are plenty of people outside who advocate for change all year round. Their advocacy should be towards the legislature for change. You're not going to get it at a convention.
Let me see if I understand this. It's going to be just like the legislature, but we should therefore leave it to the legislature. There's a certain circularity to that. If you want to break that cycle, the ability to send delegates and the ability to control their product with a final referendum vote is the only way out of the cycle of failure and despair, Jerry. You can't beat somebody with nobody. If you think the existing system is the way to go, vote no. If you think the existing system needs change, vote yes.
A constitutional convention is the kind of thing they talk about in Politics 101. As a practical matter, we haven't had one since '67. The only two very efficient ones in 1938 and in 1894 were in an environment where there was a public demand. You can't turn your desire for a constitutional convention to be something like Windex. You can use it for everything.
You don't think there's a demand for change in the way our Constitution is written?
No, I do not.
You don't think people want to figure out a better system of higher education? You don't want to think they want to address ethics and government integrity?
Well, the people I know on the higher ed side, on the ed side, and a variety are afraid of a constitutional convention, and most of them are against it.
May I suggest that the leadership cadres, the lobbyists, and the institutional interests are, of course, going to oppose this because they lose control. It is the choice between the control of the insiders or control by the people. And in that case, control by the people is vastly preferable.
You have a dream that the people will control it. The structure of the Constitutional Convention doesn't allow it.
I'm not talking about people controlling it. I can swear to you, and you know it's true, that the people will approve or disapprove the product. If the product turns out to be as bad as you hope or feel, then it will be rejected by the people. The sovereignty of the people is our best protection.
Jerry, you referenced the 1967 convention. There have been other conventions in 38, 15, and 1894.
Right.
What are the lessons from those conventions that you think people need to know, that might be applicable when considering whether to approve one this year?
Well, oddly enough, those conventions in 1894, there was a national effort, if you will, to have civil service reform, because President Garfield had been assassinated by an unhappy job seeker. In 1938, the New Deal was the National New Deal, had a great impact on the thinking of New Yorkers because there was a dramatic need for change. We can always say that the laws can be changed, but in my opinion, there is no environment right now that truly supports the need for a convention.
Were there anything that happened at those conventions that served as warning signals for people making a choice today? Did something happen at one of those conventions that makes you say, boy, we can't do that again? No,
the two of them that I thought were effective were important, but I have a different approach to this year. Since the Citizens United case, the Supreme Court decided, that corporations are people and can spend all kinds of money on political efforts. My concern also is outside money coming into New York State, which is always considered a state that other states emulate. And my concern is the potential for too much outside money being spent on our Constitutional Convention is a danger.
Richard?
If Jerry would confine himself to risks, things that we have that are good, that we don't want to lose, and therefore we don't have a convention, I think he would be wrong but reasonable. We have protections for working people, including public employees, that really need to be protected. Environmental protections, a right to a sound basic education. It is undoubtedly true that logically those things are to be considered at a convention, and you may be happy with the way things are. But on balance, two things change this conclusion. One, there are many, many, many more things that need change. And two, as long as the people of the state control the product, that whatever the convention might recommend, it does not become law unless it's approved in a second separate referendum. That saves the day.
Gentlemen, we're going to take our first break. When we come back, more about how a constitutional convention would work, who the delegates might be, and what role we the people would have in the process. We want you to join in our debate. Should New York hold a constitutional convention? If so, what issues should a convention address? What worries you about a possible con-con? And how would you amend the state constitution? Post your comments at the Richard French Live Facebook page, and we may include them in a future broadcast.